Purple Daily, meat and potatoes. Not just a deep dive, it's the deepest dive into Minnesota Vikings football.
Absolutely is, and welcome into PD Meat and Potatoes, in which Tyler Forness, AJ, and yours truly, Judd, are going to break this thing down. But before we do so, quick shout out to the exclusive personal injury law firm of this show, which is, of course, our friends at Nicolay Law. Nicolay Law knows that when you or a loved one gets injured, ordinary life, it can come to a stop and things can get complicated. But during that time, insurance companies are likely to pressure you. They don't care if you get better. They don't care if your bills are piling up, and they don't care that you may not be able to work. Nicolay Law cares about all those things. They've seen every play in the insurance company playbook, and they will get you, or they will make sure that you get the compensation that you deserve after an accident. If you've been injured, get Minnesota's local award-winning injury lawyers. Get Nicolay. See Ross right there. He means business, just like the Vikings do. Start your path to winning at nicolaylaw.com. That's NICOLET law.com. Or give him a call, 1-855-NICOLAY, 1-855-NICOLAY. All right, 2-0. Vikings off to a great start. They won week one against a weak team, and I think we all rightfully so said, okay, prove it against the 49ers who want to kick your ass. They are the defending conference champions. This is going to be a real test, and in my opinion, Tyler, the Vikings passed that test with flying colors, not only because they won, but because of the approach. This is, I think, by far and away a different Vikings team than the first two O'Connell teams. It's tougher. It's deeper for sure. Different quarterback. I want to start with you here, though. So talk to me about General Manager Kwesi Adofo-Mensah's approach here. And when we talk about additions, and the Kirk subtraction gave this team the ability to add a lot of key parts here. Talk to me about how much credit Kwesi should get because of the fact that this team now has depth on defense. It's got receiver depth. Feels like a very different roster construction than we saw in 2022 or 23.
100%. And I think the default answer for some people who have been very critical of Kwesi Adofo-Mensah is, oh, this isn't Kwesi. This is Brian Flores targeting his guys and prioritizing them. Well, it's Kwesi's job to listen to all those people and then make the decisions. And at the end of the day, he is making these decisions and they are paying off in a big way. And that's one thing when it comes to the idea of collaboration and Kwesi and Kevin O'Connell really pounding it home. Everybody collaborates in every front office. The general manager listens to everybody, but ultimately they have to make the final decision because it's their job on the line with all of these personnel moves. So he listened to Brian Flores. I mean, hypothetically speaking, let's be honest. These are Brian Flores players that are on this defense that they brought in. Jonathan Grenard, and we talked about it all offseason. Grenard is a better fit than Daniil Hunter, even though Hunter is a better player, and we've seen it pay off in droves so far. Grenard has one sack, which I find questionable that it was called a sack because it was on that 1st and 10 where he tackled Brock Purdy like with no gain, but credit with the sack, so good for him. And 12 pressures. I believe he's 3rd in the league in pressures, which is tremendous. And the Vikings are 1st in the league in sacks. And that's not just because of Grenard. Grenard is setting people up with some of these pressures. Pat Jones has 5 pressures and 4 sacks. An 80% pressure to sack conversion ratio is bonkers good. That's not going to, continue. But the way Jones is playing, he's playing out of his mind. And Judd, I know you had mentioned it, and I agreed with it, that I thought he was a trade candidate ahead of the 100%. Final cutdown because of the contract being in his final year, and he really hadn't shown a whole lot. Well, it's working, and it's working really, really well. And Jones is set to make himself some real money in the offseason. Yep. Then Andrew Van Ginkel is 1 of 3 on trying to convert those screen passes to interceptions, and that's a trend. He had one last year against Sam Howell at 1.26 seconds. The one against Daniel Jones was 1.16, and then he almost had 2 more. The dude is, you can tell he's a tape junkie because that little motion that George Kittle did was what set him off to try and get that. Like, those are little nuanced things that make these guys so good on the field. You see something small and you jump it, and good on him. But like Jihad Ward, he has been bad throughout a lot of his career. he doesn't look like the player that we saw in Oakland/Las Vegas or the New York Giants. He looks like a really good football player that can do a lot of different things, and that versatility element is so key with how Brian Flores wants to attack. These personnel moves are both short and long term, but they are maximizing what the Vikings are able to do. And Judd, I think you are the one who coined this on the flagship show, Purple Daily. If you want to play in this defense, you got to have a PhD. And you are seeing that with these guys. They are playing smart. They are playing cohesive. And I want to challenge everybody. When you watch this game on Sunday, or when you go back and rewatch this past weekend's game, before the snap, watch the defense. Watch them talk to each other. Watch them signal. Watch them communicate. And it's beautiful. You can tell that they're playing on a more advanced level than they were last year because there's a better understanding of the system than there was last year, which is normal. We saw that with Kirk Cousins from 2022 to 2023.
Right.
You have a better understanding. It becomes more second nature, and you can do a lot more with it. It's really, really impactful how some of these pieces have really been able to come in and exploit a lot of the things that the offense is showing them. Mm-hmm. And you have a guy like Stephon Gilmore who, I mean, I'm going to be real with you. Hasn't really felt impactful, but that's good because he hasn't been a negative. He's been solid. You watch the film, he is keeping up with guys. Now, will that last all year because he's 34? I don't know, but it's good right now.
He's playing sides too, dude. He's playing sides. So he is being counted upon to be what would be called a shutdown corner. Now, do I think he truly is? Probably not. But like Brian Flores, who I trust implicitly, right? Mm-hmm. Brian Flores is basically told this old guy who used to be great and now is still good, who showed up, for barely any of training camp. We trust you to be our clear-cut number one corner. But, back to your point where Kwesi gets credit here, and Brzezinski does too, because he's the cap guy. These guys aren't the guys that are going out with the shopping list, right? Or I should rephrase it this way. They're not making the list. They're being handed the list. Mm-hmm. But you still have to make the decisions to make that game work cap-wise.
Yeah.
So, okay, Kirk is gone. We can now go get 5 guys. Who should those guys be? So, I'm with you completely. I think that this currently is a credit to everyone because everyone is playing their role, and to negate it and say, well, Kwesi doesn't come up with a list. Who cares? Somebody's got to orchestrate that list to go to the grocery store and make it work. So I'm with you. I think that this has been, and it's 2 games in, but I'll say this. You know what? Going back to March, I said, these guys got a lot to prove. They've got a lot to prove as far as who they're going to bring in, what they're going to do. And I said, this to me is one of the most important off-season ventures they will encounter. Because if they blow this, it's going to be bad. And I think I subsequently said in June, they basically have done everything, in my opinion, right. So, Forno, you're spot on here. Spread the credit here because everyone has done their job. And in a salary cap league, this is a game. This is a tough game. And they have played it, at least on the surface so far, roster construction-wise, really damn well. They deserve credit for that. Absolutely.
And I've seen a few people in my mentions say that, Rob Brzezinski gets the credit for some of these. Well, who's directing Rob Brzezinski? Right. Who is being like, hey, I need you to make this work? And Brzezinski's doing it, but it's a trickle down. And Kwesi deserves to get a lot of credit because he's empowering these guys to make these kind of decisions. He is not, from an outside perspective looking in, he's not being an authoritative figure. He is being a true leader in a democratic sense because guys like Brian Flores are having major saves. I guarantee you have people like Mike Pettin who has been in the league for a long time, identify players and be like, I think this guy will work because of X, Y, and Z. And I bet you that they are making really impactful voices in those decisions. So this is a culture that they have really built over the last few years. And this culture is really starting to pay off. And going into the year, there were not a lot of expectations. I predicted 7 or 8 wins. I didn't think that super highly of this team because I just thought the question marks were so massive that they needed to prove to me that these question marks weren't going to be real on a long-term basis. Well, they're starting to prove that to me. And it will be better for the team and the culture to win 10 or 11 games and lose in the first or second round of the playoffs than it will be to finish 7-10 and get the 10th overall pick, because that is a culture building season that's going to help propel you long term. And have like the difference between pick 10 and pick 20 really isn't that much. And as far as like if you're looking at overall like win shares, EPA, that like PFF WAR, those kind of metrics, not a big disparity. There is between 1 and 10 and 20.
Yep.
It's a lot more hit and miss. So I think that this is a massive season in that perspective. I also think that they put the pieces in place. Fit matters. Infrastructure matters. Just look at Bryce Young. He went into a dumpster fire. They got rid of his top wide receiver before he even stepped in the building to get him. And then they unloaded a ton of draft pick capital in order to bring him in. And then he was set up to fail. Like Sam Darnold was set up to fail in New York. And he was set up to fail down in Carolina. Now he's with the good infrastructure, and it feels like we're getting a Geno Smith renaissance. Infrastructure, culture, and situation matter more than I think a lot of people will want to necessarily admit. And the Vikings are proving it.
On the defense, my biggest question is what's going to happen if they run into a little, because football's a physical game. Somebody's bound to get hurt. Andrew Van Ginkel, for instance, he didn't have a full practice until Friday last week. And you've seen how impactful he's been the first 2 weeks. Like what happens if somebody like him goes down and they miss? Do they have somebody that you think can just fill that type of role? I mean, you've seen how good he's been on pouncing in the flats and everything like that, but with how kind of complex and everything that Brian Flores is doing, do they have the guys that can step up and fill holes where they can still continue to play and operate at 100% what they want to do that doesn't really handicap them and say, okay, now we got to lean on a crutch and we can cover the left side maybe, but the right side is going to be a little weaker?
So the idea with the Andrew Van Ginkel thing, my perspective is this, and I think Kevin O'Connell mentioned it at his post-game presser against the Giants. They pulled him from the game just because they wanted to kind of baby the Liz Frank injury that he was still healing from. And they wanted to make sure that he was 100% good. And I think that's why they held him out of practice on Wednesday, limited on Thursday, and then he was completely fine. Liz Franks are weird in how they heal, how long it takes for them to heal. And just the whole thing about a Liz Frank is just different from other injuries. So I completely understand why they wanted to have that kind of process. But if somebody like him goes out, they're going to have to adapt and adjust. I can't tell you for certain that somebody like a Andre Carter or Bo Richter is going to be able to step up and play the exact same role. They won't. Yeah. But they may not be asked to do the exact same thing. They may ask to do something different. And Brian Flores has shown a willingness to adapt to his personnel. Like you've seen a lot of Bill Belichick disciples go in and try and be Bill Belichick. Well, it comes off inauthentic. It comes off like a dollar store version. Just look at Josh McDaniels. You can tell Brian Flores, he went down to Miami. He even mentioned, it's like, I learned a lot from my time in Miami and how I can be better and how I can be a better person and coach. That year with Mike Tomlin, I think really was an insightful process for him to try and figure out how to be better, how to interact better with these young players. Because let me tell you, I think Judd probably can see it better than you and I can, AJ, because the difference between how, like, what our generation was compared to like Judd's is significantly closer than what our generation is to this up and coming generation. Mm-hmm. So I think like I can relate better to Judd than I can relate better to somebody who's like 16, 17, 18. And those guys are now starting to come into the league as like 21-year-olds. Like that kind of introspective process, I think, really helped him. And that's why you had Josh Metellus and Harrison Phillips standing behind him. That willingness to adapt and adjust and just not be like, this is how we do it. Yeah, I think has been such a big thing. And why when Andrew Van Ginkel, like somebody like him gets hurt, they'll do more of that adapting and adjusting.
I think the difference too.
That was a great drive-by, by the way, at Josh McDaniels. That was fantastic.
Well, I mean, you could go through the list, right, of Belichickian disciples. I mean, McDaniels,
Romeo Crennel.
Yeah, who by the way was a good guy, but I mean, most of these guys are a-holes. They fail and they deserve to. But to your point, so back to your point about Flores too, though. So one is O'Connell, you can tell, is very good with the entire team. Like, guys respect him. I think that they like him. I do think that he is, if things aren't going well, I do think he will close the door and yell, as we saw on the Netflix wide receiver show. But that being said, I think Brian is very much a defensive guy. And there is a defensive mentality that is very different from like quarterbacks. And most importantly, I also think, so to go back to your point about defensive players with football PhDs, I think Flores wants a few things. One is that, but the tricky thing, and this is where they didn't just go get guys that fit his personnel, also fit his mentality. The other thing, and you can see this in games now, and you did not see this across the board a year ago when Flores was trying to piecemeal the defense together, is these guys are also crazy. Like, they are swarming. Like, so, and that has helped at the end of the day. And this is where there's been a huge shift. O'Connell, you know what? First 2 years with Kirk, for sure, very nice job. Like, I'm not going to say he didn't. But at some point in time, he decided, and this might have been, again, to the word collaboration, this might have been a collaborative decision. They all decided we got to be tougher. Like, we are not tough enough. And when you look at, Shanahan, offensive genius, look at what he's done with Purdy. But what's like the DNA of that team? They want to kick your butt. And they might lose to you, but you're going to leave the building hurting. That's how the Vikings are playing right now. That's what impresses me. So like Flores is a perfect fit here. And to go all the way back to Kwesi, where he gets credit is he was given a list of guys and he went and got them. Like, he didn't whiff. And the Gilmore thing, a lot of teams didn't make that move. And that looks like that took that room from being, I think, questionable at best, a bit scary, to, okay, this works. And what we didn't think about, or we probably did, but we didn't talk enough about at that time too, Forno, was this. The personnel has changed now. The edge room is stacked, and we have discussed this, with good players. The cornerbacks, I'm not saying that they're not super important, but they're a lot less important now because you're putting pressure and flustering quarterbacks, where last year it was like, if you don't blitz, you're screwed because the quarterbacks are going to have too much time. So that's where I love what this team has done. But my starting point is I love the mentality. I love the mentality, and I haven't seen this since Zimmer's defense in its heyday. So that's going back a long time ago.
So one of the interesting things kind of talking about that is we're seeing a massive shift in the National Football League. Over the course of the last 5 years, I think it was Steve Palazzolo, formerly of PFF, who's been tweeting out touchdown pass numbers. Like 5 years ago, in the first 2 weeks, it was something like 113. This year, I think it was like 68.
Yep.
Like, you are seeing a drastic shift in how teams are playing. Why? They don't want to get beat by the likes of Mahomes and Josh Allen deep. They're like, okay, if you're going to beat us, you're going to beat us with really concise, methodical drives. And Mahomes has adapted his game quite a bit. Now, he doesn't really have the receivers. I think Travis Kelce is getting he's a lot closer to cooked than he is elite at this point, in my personal opinion.
Sure.
Like, the guy's 35. He's a tight end. It was bound to happen.
Right.
But when you look at those factors and how teams just don't want to be beat by the deep ball, well, guess what? Time to run the football and establish the run. And that means physical play. Plus, you have a lot of linebackers coming in the league that weigh like 225 pounds. Judd, they're basically getting you at linebacker at this point.
Are fat guys coming back?
I think so.
Oh,
Fat
my
guys are
God.
coming back.
Jerry Ball's coming back.
Let's go.
Pat Williams. Oh, my God, that'd be great.
That's why guys like Jordan Davis are being drafted in the first round. Mozzie Smith, the nose tackle. Now, I think Dallas might have ruined him because they asked him to drop like 30 pounds. Yeah, like, no. The dude's a monster nose tackle who's incredibly quick for his size. You don't ruin that.
Right.
Like, those guys are coming back. Tavondre Sweat, who we kind of laughed at for some of the pre-draft process. I asked him what NFL teams told him about his like what he's going to do in the league. And he's like, they just told me to F stuff up. And it was one of the best quotes. And now he definitely cussed. I'm not going to cuss on this program, but it was one of my favorite moments from the Senior Bowl last year. And those guys are coming back. And I think you saw it Taki Taimani, the UDFA. You can find fat guys late because you know what?
Yep.
Those guys are valuable, but they're not 3-down players, and they're not going to give you some of those elevated analytical metrics where pass rush dominates. Well, guess what? 2-gapping wins football games, and Taki can do that, and he had some really good plays. He's only played 21 snaps over the first 2 weeks,
right?
But those 21 snaps have been pretty good. He had the largest disparity in yards per play with him on the field versus with him off. It was like, I think it was 0.8 yards per play with him on the field, 5.8 with him off the field. Now, it's a small sample size, but that's incredibly promising over from Sunday's game because Taki can hold you and then burst to either gap just like Harrison Phillips can. And that kind of stuff matters. Judd, Fat Boy football is going to be coming back. You're seeing a lot more power running plays versus zone running plays.
Yep.
And look, it's time to just whip some ass, boys. And I think Kevin O'Connell really feels that this offensive line can do that. They are 13th in the league in rushing with 257 yards. After 2 weeks last year, they had 69 rushing yards.
I know. I looked it up.
A significant improvement.
And Blake Brandel's good, by the way.
Hey, I beat the drum for it. His biggest issue coming out of Oregon State in 2020, he could not handle speed on the outside. Guess what? You don't have to handle speed on the inside. 60 pass blocking reps, 0 credited pressures per Pro Football Focus. He is moving guys. He is significantly better than Dalton Reisner. I think his play style fits more what Kevin O'Connell wants in the running game than Ezra Cleveland, which is why they moved on from him. I'm not going to say he's a better player, but he's a better fit. And fit matters. Fit does matter at a certain point over talent. So we're getting back to old school big boy football, and I like it.
I think I just found the first T-shirt for the show: Fat Boy Football or Big Boy Football, whatever we'll workshop it a little bit.
Fat Boy Football's good.
Absolutely.
Fat Boy Football.
Fat Boy Football is back. It is great. So from that to the play through 2 games, and we got to keep in mind it's 2 games. I get that. Okay. Sam Darnold.
Yeah.
What are you seeing on film? What are you seeing as far as what O'Connell is doing? As we saw again on Sunday, Justin Jefferson's a cheat code, but he still made a great pass. 55 yards in the air, in stride. So he's a cheat code, but that's a play that a lot of guys can't, or a throw that a lot of guys can't make. What are you seeing as far as I don't want to say resurgence because there was no initial surge. What are you seeing as far as Sam Darnold's success through 2 games and what O'Connell is doing as far as calling plays for him?
Judd, I'm calling it a renaissance. This is the kind of thing that we saw from Geno Smith in 2022. And Geno Smith is arguably a top 10 quarterback in the NFL now. Will Darnold get to that point? I'm not going to say yes or no, but I'm going to leave it ambiguous. I always say that word wrong. I don't know why. Because one of the big things, it's about confidence. I wrote 1,300 words on just confidence that Darnold has and O'Connell has. And if you remember, Judd, you weren't at the post-game presser because you were doing vent line, I think. But
yeah, I don't go to the post-game pressers.
O'Connell started tearing up.
Oh, I watched it.
With Darnold.
He was emotional.
It was incredible. And it was genuine. It was real. Why? Because he is playing so well. And it's about process. We talk about it all the time. Process over results. Because if you have great process, you will get great results.
Yep.
Over the course of time. You may miss every once in a while. Like that Fred Warner interception. Fred Warner's the only linebacker in the league that makes that play.
Dude, watching him live was incredible. Warner is
so good.
Like he's good on film, but when you see him live, it's like, oh my God, this guy is dominant. So yes, you're right.
It's reminiscent of watching Bryant Urlacher with the Bears.
Yeah.
Because he just moves so differently than everybody else at the position.
Like a safety.
Yeah. And Urlacher was the safety at New Mexico.
Yep.
It's just different. Yep. So when you watch Darnold's process and how he's handling pressure, now the offensive line gets a lot of credit. Darnold was pressured 9 times, according to Pro Football Focus on Sunday. 3 of them were credited to Darnold, not the offensive line. Only 6 allowed pressures by the offensive line.
Wow.
3 by Christian Darrisaw, which, you know what? That's fine. You got beat by Nick Bosa 3 times. If it's only 3 times out of 31 dropbacks,
that's haymakers, baby.
We take that. We take that. One each from Brandel, Ingram, and O'Neal. Like, the offensive line played really well, and that 97-yard pass, you got to be confident that the offensive line is going to hold up. And that concept takes a long time to develop. But he made the correct read because it's a dagger. So a lot of times with dagger, it's the outside guys running that dig route, the inside guys running deep. Sometimes it's a go, sometimes it's a post. Jefferson's running the post. You get that deep safety to bite just 2 short steps towards Naylor. Jefferson takes it over the top, 97 yards, touchdown. Mm-hmm. You got to have confidence in everybody. Everybody played their role. Everybody was great. And all of a sudden, it feels just different. There's a different vibe in the room. It was really similar, Judd, to that Bernard Berrien touchdown, because in 2008 from Gus Frerotte, both of them came right after a goal line stand. You get a goal line stand and flip it like that, that's a 14-point swing. That's momentum. That is confidence in your team. That is that's culture building. It all intertwines together. And the one thing that keeps me from like believing that, hey, this is just an aberration. We have a 2-game sample size now of Darnold navigating the pocket like a pro, feeling comfortable, not panicking. That to me is the beginning of a trend. It is not like, hey, this guy stinks. Now, once we get 4 or 5 games of film, how are defenses going to play him different? Correct. How are things going to change, and how does he adapt to that? That's the next step in the growth of Sam Darnold. Because remember, in 2021, he went 3-0 for the Panthers, and he looked pretty good. He also played the 3 worst teams in the league. So that in itself was like, okay, this is an aberration. We kind of thought that going into that 4th game, and it was proven right. This is different. He played a great defensive front in the New York Giants, but a bad football team. And then he played the second best football team from the 2023 season, who did not see many huge changes on the defensive side of the football, and beat them. Not a fluke win.
Right.
That was a big boy win. That was real. Well, you can't look at that game and say, hey, they lucked into this. No, they just went out and beat them.
And as coach, like this is the thing of because you're right. Teams are going to adjust. They're going to see things. This league is constant, and it's what actually makes this league so much fun. It's constant adjustments. But this is a situation where, to go back to the infrastructure now, right? You've got a coach who's guiding you, who's helping you. And plus, the other thing that's huge is you have a run game. Like if you look at this, the fact that, 69 yards through 2 games, you now have back-to-back as a team, and I don't really care who gets the yards. You have back-to-back games over 100 yards. You can pound the ball. Your offensive line is no question tougher. So, there is just a lot of things. I watch it, and guys get hurt. I get that. And the style that the Vikings are playing, guys will get hurt. Like this is the San Fran loses a lot of guys. You know why? Because they play this style. But that being said, they're currently without Addison, Hawkinson. We can go down a list of some guys that are very good who aren't playing. So I am super enthused about what I'm seeing as far as mentality goes. And Darnold, for $10 million, doesn't need to be Joe Montana. Darnold needs to execute what O'Connell wants. And the thing that he's got, which he gets complete credit for, is that might be a howitzer attached to his body. That arm, that throw to Jefferson, dude, 5-step drop, 2 crow hops, boom, it's out. It took a while to develop. Great blocking. That thing's out, and that thing, I watched it live, hits Jefferson in stride. Mm-hmm. There was a, like live, you could see. So Justin in double coverage is open lots of times. Just like the 44-yard completion against the Giants, that thing hits him in stride. Everyone does their job. That's awesome. But I love the fact that O'Connell seems to have identified, and this shouldn't be tough. It is. I love he's identified what Sam does well and uses that instead of seemingly harping on what he doesn't do well.
Yeah. And I think we would be remiss to not talk about this, Judd. That 14-play drive that ate up 6 minutes and 36 seconds of that clock.
Huge.
So good.
Haters will say that the running game carried that drive. The running game was a big part of it. But it was those third down plays that it made it the Sam Darnold legacy drive. That was incredible quarterbacking, incredible play calling, confident play calling, because you know what? Vikings were about to go up by 3 touchdowns with that Aaron Jones score, but it got punched out by who else? Fred Warner, one of the best players in the NFL today. And they drove 99 yards and got a touchdown to bring it within 6. Old Vikings teams would have been like, oh, that's it. That first third down, it's like, oh boy, here we go again. This is where the Vikings would turtle. They wouldn't get the third down. No Jefferson, no Addison, no Hawkinson. They got a bunch formation on the far side of the field. Brandon Powell runs it out route, catches it, 11 yards, first down. The next third down, that 3rd and 8, hit that seam route to Jalen Naylor, a perfect throw to split coverage with 3 guys around. You can't ask for better than that. You can't ask for a better throw. You can't ask for a better throw from Patrick Mahomes.
No, it was a great play on both sides.
It was nails. And all of a sudden it's like, okay, this is a real thing. And they ate up clock and they tried to get in the end zone, but they didn't push their luck because they knew if they turned it over, well, that's a whole different kind of ball game.
Right.
We're going to try and get a touchdown, but if we can't, we got a field goal. Will Riker puts them up 9. And once they got past the 2-minute warning, it was basically the game.
Yep. The only thing I didn't like about that entire drive was the potential for what looked like a Ty Chandler halfback pass to Munt. I'm like, I don't need this right now. You need a field goal. So that was the only thing. But, and Brandon Powell, 2, 3rd and 7, the one that I thought actually back a couple years ago that the Vikings don't convert was the first one.
Mm-hmm.
But that was such a spectacular play call. And Powell, to his credit, makes the play. Like, these are things, too. Like, that bunch formation was Naylor, Powell, Tristan Jackson. And for them to go down the field, but I'll go back to it. I think it's a mentality as well. It's play calling extraordinary. Darnold extraordinary, but it's also, you know what? We're going to get this. We're going to kick some ass as opposed to the old, woe is me, we're in trouble here. Just gave up, a fumble, and now we're going to lose the ball. I just loved everything about that game from like those type of standpoints. Fornell.
Yeah, me too. And I still remember when the bunch formation came into the league. Those 1998 Atlanta Falcons were the ones who really popularized it. And they were just destroying people with it because teams just could not figure out how to stop it. It was brand new. Well, even today, it's incredibly difficult for teams to stop because there's so many moving parts. You got switch releases all the time. And you can really manipulate a defense, even a really good defense, with that kind of thing. And they have the little short motion with Brandon Powell, which sets off a whole bunch of other things too. And kudos to Kevin O'Connell, brilliant play calling. Kudos to the players for brilliant execution. This is humming. There's still flaws. There's still mistakes.
Right. Turnovers.
But these wins are real. They're not, oh my gosh, I can't believe we pulled that out. It's like, I can't believe we played that well and won. It's a different vibe coming out of these games. Like that Buffalo game, there were a lot of great plays, but that felt way more fluky than a win like this.
Oh, God, yeah. Yeah, because your style. So, topic 2, Purple Daily on Draft. Give me what you are looking forward to this weekend as far as what could potentially affect the Vikings eventually, with the college game, and what players are you keeping an eye on Saturday?
Well, Judd, I'm not going to be watching a whole ton of college football because I'll be with you in the tailgate lot on Saturday. Minnesota, Iowa, baby. I've never been to it.
Start right there.
Yeah. I'm really excited to kind of see what this Minnesota offense looks like in person because I've had them on the TV, but they've never been on my main screen. For those who don't know, three TVs, and I usually have a game or two on the monitor or iPad. Just making sure I watch as much as I possibly can.
Love it.
But Darius Taylor, he's only a true sophomore. That dude can ball. Marcus Major is backup. Could be like a sneaky 6th or 7th round pick who makes a team and is more like a power style back.
Taylor's for real, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I really like him.
Yeah, he's really, really good. And then you have players like Quinn Carroll, an offensive lineman who finally kicked inside. Does he have an NFL future? I want to see a little bit of that. I want to see Daniel Jackson, the wide receiver. If he were anywhere else on an offense that really prioritized throwing the football and was a little bit more schematically friendly to a guy like him, I think he'd be getting a lot more hype. He's a guy that could go day 2. He's a really talented player with jets, and I want to see him. Plus, I want to see the Gophers just whip Iowa's butt because I think Iowa stinks. Sorry, Thor, but I'm not sorry at all.
They're not that good.
No, I don't think they're that good either. And that offense is just still atrocious. It's hilarious. But outside of that, I think Tennessee, Oklahoma is a game to watch. I want to see James Pierce, the edge rusher, how he handles dealing with that Oklahoma offensive line. Now, it's relatively down compared to some of like the great offensive lines we've seen from the Sooners, but it's a good group. How does he get to Jackson Arnold? Plus, you got to play contain because Arnold's got a great use of his legs and can really gash you in the running game. How do all those things factor in? I think that's the game to watch. Texas A&M will continue to be a team to watch. I haven't mentioned them on this program. They've got a great defensive line. Nick Scourton, they're Scorton. I'm not 100% sure how you pronounce his last name. He's a Purdue transfer. He's a big boy edge. That dude can flat out move, and he was really impressive against my Florida Gators this past weekend. And then Ole Miss, also a team to watch. Walter Nolan, who's the number 1 recruit in 2022. That is a penetrating 3 technique that the Vikings sorely need on this defensive line. Harrison Phillips, great player. I can't believe he's only on a 7.5 average annual value extension over the next 2 years. Like, that's bonkers value for a player that plays like him. That just shows you how much he wants to be there, because he probably gets 12, 13 million at least if he hits the open market. That speaks to how much he loves being here. That, from my outside perspective, that is. And yep. I think if you get a gap penetrating interior rusher and a solid cornerback and maybe an upgrade at wide receiver, I like Naylor a lot, but I think if you can get an elite guy, that completely changes the fabric of what you're dealing with on offense. Mm-hmm. We're cooking with gas, Judd, and we're cooking hard.
I told you, next year starts the real, like this is going to be, it feels like a potentially unexpected fun success, which is a great thing in sports. It feels like 2025, though, is going to open a window that we have not seen here in a while. All right, AJ, let's get right to it with the questions for Forno.
Yeah, absolutely. If you do have questions and want to email into the show, pdmeatandpotatoes@gmail.com is the address for that. First one comes here from Riley. Hey, Forno and Judd. I was scrolling through Twitter after Sunday's win, basking in the feeling of being 2-0 undefeated, and I saw a guy post a picture pre-snap that said, I can't believe Brian Flores ran Tampa from this look. And essentially, he describes it as like pretty much everybody was showing blitz. They were down on the line. He wants to know if you could talk about the way that Flores is able to kind of disguise his defenses and how many ways he's able to do so, like, effectively and efficiently. Like, how many looks can you actually, like, fake and then drop back into a Tampa look?
That last line of the verbiage is interesting. I think it's infinite.
Okay.
And I mean this in the most complimentary way possible. Brian Flores is a degenerate. It's incredible watching him. It's incredible watching how he manipulates things. And these guys, and I said it earlier in the show, go back and watch Sunday's game or watch this Sunday's game. And when they're playing defense, don't look at the offensive side. Watch the defense. Watch their communication. Watch how they signal to each other. The reason why they can have pretty much everybody on the line and play drop 8 Tampa 2 is because these guys are tremendous. They may not be the greatest athletes, but intelligence and reaction can beat great athleticism.
Blake Cashman.
Green
dot guy now, too.
He's a really good athlete. And I learned yesterday watching the film, just because I'm like, man, Cashman's really good. I looked at his athletic profile coming out. Judd, first percentile arm length, 30.5 inches.
All those tip passes.
No, Judd, that's what I'm saying. If he had like 50th percentile, those are probably interceptions because they're so short. Like, he is playing out of his absolute mind. Just Cashman might be the biggest signing that the Vikings have made because they don't have to rely on Pace to be that guy, because Pace isn't that guy. Pace is so good in his role, and he's great at penetrating because he's so small and he can dip underneath offensive linemen and make plays that way. And Cashman can just be the every down linebacker and make those plays. And he was the first guy since 2013 to have a stat line that had 13 tackles, 1 sack, and 3 passes defended in a game. I mean, that's one of those things like, oh, it feels like made up, but that's how impressive of a game he had. Yep. And to kind of wrap this whole thing up in a bow, if you have the guys who are smart enough to be able to deploy any kind of look like where he has everybody lining up front and then bailing out last second, you can do pretty much anything. A great way to epitomize it, that Josh Metellus interception against Green Bay last year, where he started in front of the center in that same look and bailed out into a Tampa 2 and got the pick.
Yep.
Like, they can do pretty much anything because they're intelligent, they get it, they have great chemistry, and Brian Flores is incredibly brilliant.
They're positionless.
Yeah.
Like that's the thing, is they're positionless. Like this is where the difference, the obvious difference in size in the edge room to me is so huge, right? Mm-hmm. Danielle Hunter was fantastic at what he did, but he was not a guy who was comfortable or used to dropping in coverage. You look at Van Ginkel, Dallas Turner, Grenard, look at what these guys can do, and you tell me. You look at Hunter on Sunday, and then look at Grenard, Van Ginkel, and if he plays Turner, and you tell me that you think that those guys play the same spot. So, like, these are the things that make this absolutely great. And I will say this: the dirty little secret is, do you recall when for the second consecutive year Harrison Smith took a pay cut? And there was immediate, I think, in the press conference, talk about, well, are they going to cut his snaps back? He played a ton last year. Theo Jackson going to rotate in for him. If you look right now, Harrison Smith barely coming off the field. Why? Because I would say if there is a head professor on the field, it's probably Harrison Smith. Well, so I could talk about this forever because I think it's so interesting.
So to kind of go off that Harrison Smith point, Brian Flores said, yeah, we had a plan last year to limit Harrison Smith's snaps, but he's Harrison Smith and he didn't want to come out.
He PhD.
Like, what are you going to do? Tell him, no, you got to get your butt out. He played really well all year.
And if you tell him that, though, okay, who replaces the intelligence? Like to your point about communication, right? Watch that dude. He's not only showing different looks, he's communicating to teammates exactly what they should be doing. Like he is again the professor. He might not be the best player left for sure. He's not the most athletic, but nobody is smarter. So like there is a lot of in some ways nuance here to why this stew works. Age, go ahead.
Yeah, last one here coming from Carter. He says, hey, guys, love the show so far. Saw that Sam Darnold was pressured, and this is something you both kind of talked about earlier in the show, that he's pressured less than 10 times by the 49ers on Sunday, and he just kind of wants to know, is that just because the O-line is just simply better than what we've seen in past years, or is there something you can do coaching-wise to really bring that play to the next level?
I think it's a combination. I think this O-line is better than last year. I think Brandel is playing better than Ezra Cleveland and Dalton Reisner did. Look, I don't think Dalton Reisner should be a starter for this football team. That's going to make a lot of people mad. I don't care. I think Ed Ingram is better than Dalton Reisner, and I really don't think Reisner is a capable enough run blocker to be a starter in the National Football League. Ingram has his flaws, but his flaws are more about consistency than ability, because he bullied San Francisco yesterday or on Saturday. He bullied them. And I think some of it, AJ, has to do with the quarterback back there, where Kirk Cousins, for better or worse, and there were a lot of good things about it, he was very robotic. And it was one of the things with Christian Darrisaw, where, hey, I know on this drop, he's going to be at this landmark. Well, now all I have to do is push the edge rusher around you because I know exactly where you're going to be at. Yeah. And they had to block a little bit differently, per se, when you talk about like Cousins, because he wasn't going to run around. He wasn't going to try and create. If there was a gaping hole in front of you, yeah, he'll take it for 10, 15 yards. Tom Brady would do that, but he's not going to want to. It's not his game to try and do that. Darnold, that's more of his game, is to move around and try and make a play. And he was able to gash both the Giants and the 49ers for some big chunks of yards. And when you have that, you have to block a little bit differently and trying to figure out the comfort level of both, like the quarterback that you're blocking for. And I think it's a little bit of coaching and a little bit of just overall performance and that kind of chemistry. And I think that's going to continue to build, and there's going to continue to be like, okay, I know Darnold is going to be in around this position, but then when things break down, then how am I going to handle that? What am I going to do after that point?
Right.
There's so many nuances where there isn't really a concrete answer, but I do think the O-line is playing better. And I think the Vikings do genuinely have a great offensive line. It's still a little bit flawed, but great is a very relative term. And when you're talking about offensive lines in the NFL, they are definitely great per dollar. Like the money balling approach in the interior of that offensive line right now is working. Blake Brandel is arguably their best offensive lineman right now. He's making an average of $3.16 million per year.
It's a steal now. That's an absolute steal.
It was a steal when they signed it.
No, right. So to go back to the 97-yard touchdown to Jefferson, just a small thing there too, but I think this is among the things that have shifted. O'Connell was comfortable calling that play in part because if you go back and watch, Aaron Jones stays in and helps with protection as well. I don't know a year ago you have that. I don't know a year ago you trust Madison as much. Like Jones is a consummate pro, and just that, it's a small thing, but it's a huge thing, right? Because you cannot take a chance there. And so like this comes full circle to the start of the show. This has so much to do with what Kwesi and the entire front office did to get these parts here where, like, why is it different? Because it's been changed as far as personnel goes, as far as personalities go. This is sort of why, and we'll end on this, but this is sort of why in year one, I wasn't a huge fan of trying to run things back. And I know they won 13 games, but I wanted to get to this as soon as possible. Like, this is the fun. This is the identity. It's a new identity. And I get it. They took Zim's team. I think they basically thought it's not bad. And it wasn't. They won 13 games. But this is what I wanted to get to. I will say this, though, in retrospect. Now, you were never going to get here with Donatel as DC. So until Flores showed up to actually, show up as the chef of defense, but this to me is what makes this so fun. It's like, this is not a team that we've seen. And I would say this, I think it's very fair to say that this is the first incarnation of Kwesi and O'Connell's team, truly theirs, that we have seen. And it's fun to watch.
Yeah.
So
this is,
I'm not going to,
it's going to be really fun, Judd.
I like it. Health, knock on wood. You need health, but beyond that, yes. Exactly right. I get nervous. It's
That's
just
fair.
In my sports dad nature. All right. Forno, check out his work. He also covers the Vikings for A to Z Sports and his First and Skol channel as well. That show is recorded or posted when, Tyler?
Mondays and Wednesdays, and we have a bunch of other stuff on the network too.
Very nice. Very nice. I'm Judd. He is AJ. Meat and Potatoes returns next week, where hopefully we're talking about a victory over the Texans.